Starry River, Chapter 31. That night, Rindy lay awake in his bed. He thought about Fang and Lou, the Duke, and all that had happened. Was his father really looking for him? He was unsure how that made him feel. He stared out into the black sky while the wind moaned again. The cries grew louder in Rindy's ears. What was crying like that? And for the first time Rindy wondered why. Was the person in pain? Why didn't anyone help him? But Madame Chang said she heard the cries, only faintly, and no one else seemed to hear them at all. Did Mr. Shan? Rindy remembered Mr. Shan's back straightening stiffly when the groans blew in. Maybe Mr. Shan heard them too, but did no one hear them the way he did? The plaintive call, beckoning and begging. He sat up. Whoever was crying had been doing so for weeks and weeks, and maybe no one had helped because Rindy was the only one who could really hear it. And suddenly shame filled him. Ever since he started hearing the cries, all he had thought about was himself, never about who was suffering or how he could help. Well, he would find out and help now, Rindy thought with determination. It was his turn to save someone. He stood up and took the plain cloth bag from his drawer, the same one as he had packed so long ago. Now he emptied it of his belongings and started to repack. What did one bring for something like this, he thought? Extra clothes? Cloth for bandages? A knife? Maybe the person was crying out of hunger. Food. Then, a jug of wine. Rindy tiptoed into the kitchen, filling his bag with anything he thought might be helpful. His bag a bit unwieldy as he slung it over his shoulders. Then he took a lantern heavy with oil and crept out of the inn. The dark night was full of sad groans, and for a moment Rindy felt as if they were coming from the empty sky above. Slowly he located the direction of the moans. Yet, as he lit his lantern, he gulped. The moans were coming from across the stone pancake, that rock that stretched for miles and miles. He would be lost in no time out there. The groans came again, and Rindy took a deep breath. Well, maybe that's why the person was crying. Maybe someone was lost out there on the stone plain. Well, if he was going to save them, he had to go out, but not get lost himself. I must have to mark my way, he said, so I can find my way back. He swung the lantern around the yard, trying to find something to help him. A light stone on a pile of empty snail shells, garbage from Master Child's new dishes. Well, they were dry from being in the daytime sun, and there were a lot of them. I'll use those, Rindy whispered, feeling his pockets. The breeze carried another sad whimper, and Rindy stepped out into the flat stone. He raised the lantern and looked at the endless blackness in front of him. He dropped a snail shell, listened, and walked forward. He took one step after another, occasionally dropping a snail shell, until he was a small pinprick of light, like a bright star in the darkness. Chapter 32. Rindy felt as if he had been walking for miles, and his pockets began to lighten. He dropped snail shells less frequently, and he began to worry that he would not have enough. But just when he ran out, something other than flat stone and black sky formed in the landscape. A large, tall shadow of a tree reached into Starry River like an arm beckoning. As Rindy walked closer, he was also able to see a stone bridge that extended over a lake, both almost invisible in the darkness. The lantern created a circle of light around Rindy as he walked over the bridge. He saw his reflection in still water. He felt as if he were walking over the night sky. For there seemed no difference between the two. The moans grew stronger and stronger with each step he took. So he knew he was going in the right direction. He stepped off the bridge onto a grassy ground. The weeds, getting their water from the lake, were soft under his feet, so different from the dried, scorched plants in the village. With his lantern held high, Rindy saw a low, hilly area before him. The groans grew even louder, and Rindy frowned. It seemed as if the cries were coming from inside one of the hills. Stretching the light out in front of him, Rindy peered into the darkness. One of the hills appeared to have a large black opening. Was there a cave in that hill? He walked closer, and words came back to his ears. An ancient dark hole in one of the hills, Madame Chang had said in her stories. A dark hole like a cave. Rindy swung around, the lantern swaying. It was just like the place Madame Chang had described. A lake, a tall tree, an ancient cave. All that was missing was the mountain. As Rindy stood in front of the opening, he gulped. Did this mean the white tiger lived here? But the white tiger was gone now. It was a different vicious tiger that had, or was it a different vicious tiger that had been moaning all this time? Another groan resonated from the darkness in front of him. The groan was sad and mournful, like a temple bell at a funeral. But there was also something else in the sound. There was yearning and longing in it. There was an echo of something deep inside Rindy's own chest, and what made him finally enter. Hello? Rindy called. His voice was thin, and it faded into the endless blackness. In the cave the air was cool, and the earth was soft on his feet. Hello? Another moan blew at him, and Rindy raised his lantern even higher. There was something in front of him, something very large. He could make out a huge form, bigger than a horse, but strangely shapeless. It was glowing with an eerie, soft, faint green light. What was it? Rindy took slow, careful steps forward, the light shaking from the trembling lantern. Suddenly, from the strange mass, two enormous eyes blinked open. Like two round melons, they bulged and stared right at Rindy. They were the eyes of a monstrous toad. Chapter 33. Rindy shrieked and ran back the way he had come, his heart thudding louder than his feet on the ground. His fear overwhelmed any thoughts. Was it the real noxious toad? Would it breathe on him its poisonous vapor? Rindy burst out of the hill, gasping and panting. The cool breeze from the lake blew over him, calming him like a gentle touch. The light from his lantern flickered over the water, making twinkling stars in the rippling waters. The tranquil scene soothed him, and as he caught his breath, another moan came from the hill. It did not seem malicious. It seemed sad. And then Rindy remembered the eyes, those eyes of the monstrous toad, were full of pain and sorrow. They were, in fact, much like the eyes of Mr. Shan's toad when it became a three-legged. Rindy thought with a pang. Well, what if that giant toad wasn't the noxious toad, Rindy thought, his mind racing. What if it was Yang Li's wife? What if Madame Chang was wrong and Yang Li's wife had never returned back into a woman? What if she stayed a toad? And then, with the moon missing, she was stuck here on Earth, hiding in this hill. A dim light began to spill out of the hill. The toad had followed him, but was moving so slowly, Rindy could easily run and disappear from sight by the time the toad exited. Rindy looked at the bridge, but stood still and waited. Finally, the toad emerged, its greenish glow lighting the surroundings as if it were a giant misshapen lantern. The toad was so large that Rindy's head just reached the top of its bulbous leg, and its warty skin was like weathered, rotten leather. Rindy quaked again at its monstrous ugliness, but the toad gave another pathetic moan of pain, and Rindy's pity drove away his fear. The toad did not look well. The odd green glow was coming from its bloated belly, and it made it look wan and sickly. No wonder the toad had moved so slowly. It continued to hold its stomach with both its front legs and moaned. Rindy wondered if it had swallowed fireflies like Mr. Shan's toad had. It must have had to swallow a lot, Rindy thought, surveying the size of the toad's swollen belly. But that would explain why it had a stomach ache at least. Rindy felt the weight of the bag on his shoulders. Would the wine make the toad feel better? He took out the jug. "Maybe this will help your stomach," Rindy said, holding out the wine. His words felt clumsy and out of place in the still night. "Do you want to try it?" The toad's eyelids lifted halfway, and its eyes, as black as watermelon seeds, looked at the jug. "It's sun wine," Rindy said. "It's good. I should know. My father invented it." The toad made a questioning noise, and Rindy, to fill the silence, perhaps out of habit, began to tell the story. The story of sun wine. When my mother was a child, for the first time, my father, the magistrate, was overjoyed. "The blood of the greatest ruler and hero will be passed on," he declared triumphantly. "I'm sorry." Ha ha, I know that didn't make sense. When my mother was with child for the first time, my father, the magistrate, was overjoyed. "The blood of the great ruler and hero will be passed on," he declared triumphantly. "My blood will continue in my son." Accordingly, he planned a grand feast for when the baby was to be born. He told his servants to fatten a pig and make 88 jars of the finest rice wine, and to prepare for the greatest festivities the township had ever seen. He laughed and joked boisterously, accepting congratulations as if his own wife had already given birth. My mother worried, but in my father's mind, a son already existed. His imagination had lost all boundaries, and my father pictured a son gifted with as much strength, bravery, and cleverness as an immortal. "My son will become a king," he thought, with grand contentment, "and then his son will become emperor, and we will rule again." So when a daughter was born, my father was devastated. When the midwives told him that my mother had given birth to a girl, his face blackened like burned wood, and he stormed out of the room without even glancing at the baby. "A daughter!" he said bitterly. My father was angry at the baby girl, as if she had somehow stolen the son he was expecting. In a rage, he turned all the guests from his door and ordered the banquet feast to be thrown to the pigs, and the jars of wine burned. If anyone offered him a word of congratulations, he scowled and ordered them from his sight. For the next year, my mother and the servants kept the baby out of his way as much as possible. My father's anger slowly lessened, but the resentment remained. When my mother told him they were expecting another child, he only replied, "Will it be another girl like the last one?" This time my father did not prepare a banquet, or brew wine, or boast. He felt humiliated from before, and he didn't even dare to dream about a son this time. But when the baby was born, it was me, a boy. My father's wish for a son was fulfilled. And my father was overjoyed with pride and joy. Overwhelmed with pride and joy. He strutted and trumpeted like a rooster, inviting all the officials and people of his township to what he promised would be a splendid celebration. However, since my father had made no preparations ahead of time, now there was a great rush. Servants ran from peddler to grocer all over the city. The pig, which was now extremely fat, was quickly butchered, and his chefs worked without sleeping. Throughout the night, they were coloring red eggs until their hands and arms were dyed as well, and when the rooster crowed in the morning, The chiefs were stewing, roasting, and boiling so quickly that the steam became thick as smoke. They fried golden sesame balls as round as plums, and cut ginger into delicate paper-thin slices so that it looked like flower petals on a plate. Platters of dark honey-colored pork were garnished with jade-green lettuce, and white dumplings floated in bowls of sweet soup like clouds. The servants proudly placed the food on the table. "But where is the wine?" my father demanded. "I cannot hold a celebration without wine. Get the wine!" The servants retreated and looked at one another blankly. Well, they could not make wine in such a short amount of time. Well, what could they do? Finally, a servant remembered something. "There are 88 jars of wine that we buried when the magistrate's daughter was born," he said. "We can dig them up." So they did. When my father readied to open the doors of his home, it was a glorious feast. It was his proudest moment. When I, his son, was revealed, my father's delight seemed to transform him. In his happiness, kind words and compliments flowed from him like a spring river. He himself brought my mother the bowl of the strengthening ginger soup, and even gently patted my sister's head. The birth of a son had, at least for the day, turned the old bitterness sweet. Which was much like the wine that was served. After being buried in the ground so long, the wine had a different scent and taste. It was fragrant and pure, and all the guests agreed it was delicious. "What kind of wine is this?" an official asked my father. "I've never tasted wine quite like this before. How did you brew it?" "It is sun wine," my father said after a pause, "to celebrate my son. The servants can tell you how it was made." And so, sun wine, this wine, was created, Rindy said. I was the son the wine honored, but I always thought it should be called daughter wine because it was made when my sister was born. I always felt it wasn't fair that my father didn't celebrate her. She's smarter than me, and braver too. Rindy looked off into the far distance, past where the lantern of his light shone. The great toad made no sound. "When I said that to my mother and sister," Rindy continued, "they told me it didn't matter. They said because I was born, our father stopped hating my sister for not being a boy, and resenting my mother for not having a son. My sister even said that when I was born, it made everything right and happy. So I deserved the celebration because everyone loved me so." Rindy's voice broke off. He stopped speaking and shook his head, trying to forget his own words. But then he looked up at the toad, and their eyes met. And suddenly, in that moment, Rindy's secret wish was revealed. A wish he didn't even know he had. Because when Rindy looked into the toad's eyes, he knew why the toad cried. The toad wished to go home. And Rindy could hear those cries because he did too. All this time he had tried to forget his past, hating when he remembered. He had told himself he never wanted to go back, but one look into the eyes of this toad, and he knew that was not the truth. He missed his sister, and he missed his mother, and he even missed his father. He missed his home. His eyes mirrored the toad's, and all filled with tears. They were both missing their homes, just as Wang Yi was missing his wife, and like the sky was missing the moon. Stopping point. To be continued.